one of those categories, it's automatically protected by copyright. Some countries require publication. Some countries require a little C to be put on the copyright notice, which is recognised internationally. In the UK, you don't need to do that, although many people do it as a matter of caution if something's going to be circulated overseas, but it's not technically not required. And it lasts for the life of the creator of the work, or the person to whom it's assigned, plus 70 years. So 70 years after an author dies, that person's works are still in copyright. 70 years later, they fall out of copyright. And we've seen that phenomenon in the book market. You suddenly find some author suddenly falls out of copyright. Whoop, lots of their books appear on the shelves, and all of a sudden anybody can print them at that point. Next slide, Sally. The copyright and related right regulations extended copyright and modified it in many ways to deal with the internet. And these made it clear that in any ambiguous areas where people thought it might not apply to internet-based rights, it actually does now. These regulations apply. So in summary, copyright, next slide, Sally. What does copyright do? It prevents the reproduction of the copyright work, the protected work, in any material form. It prevents the making of any adaptation of that work, the translation of the work. So if you translated it from English to French or Polish or German, the mere act of translating it, if it's a copyright work, is actually an infringement. Or the publishing of the work. Right? Publishing means making available to anyone publicly, simple as that. If you do any of those things without the consent of the copyright owner, you infringe the copyright in the work, and it's an actionable wrong. The problem is, though, that when you go onto, next slide, Sally, onto some websites, newspaper websites, for example, or film websites, you come across some interesting things like these. Could you try and click onto the top one, please, Sally, and see if it opens up? Because copyright owners, publishers have recognised that putting stuff online is actually going to encourage people to copy. It'll take a long time. So what they've done is they put copyright conditions on the website, which you can actually access when you go to any particular website, and it'll tell you what your rights are in respect to material on that website. Some of them, quite frankly, I don't understand. They're really complex. You know, they're written by lawyers for lawyers, so quite how Joe Public is meant to understand it is beyond me. This is the FT copyright notice, so you might expect it to be quite complicated. So you can look at those copyright notices. And so, as I say, it's very, very confusing on the internet. Next slide, Sally. If you go, for example, to a typical film promotion website, and this is the Eclipse Twilight, you'll find down here, you can actually download stuff. And up here it says, would you like to download this video? And you can share it with people. So the owners of websites and the owners of copyright material encourage you to actually share it. And then they come along later and say, you broke my copyright. So it's no wonder that the public at large gets quite confused by this. And on the other hand, you can go to a site such as this, which claims, and I thought this was quite cheeky down here, legal P2P. It's like being an illegal criminal. You know, a legal criminal, I can do what I like because I put the word legal in front of it. And if you download from that site, you're doing something illegal. If you download it from the previous site, if you go back up, Sally, you're doing something that's quite legal if you download what they say you can download. So the average person coming across these things is going to get quite confused, quite frankly. So the solution that's been offered to all of this is the passing of this piece of legislation. It's designed, it was intended to clear it up. That was the idea. And it was granted the royal assent on the 8th of April, as this says. And the Copyright Infringement Initial Obligations Code came out Friday, just last Friday, just before the holiday, setting out proposals for drawing up the initial obligations of internet service providers. Because the way this new piece of legislation works, and we'll go into the detail in a moment, is it puts an obligation on any ISP, potentially, to disclose to copyright owners the identities of people who have been using that ISP service to infringe the copyright in the work in question. There's a technical obligations code which is quite detailed, and it's under discussion at the moment through the end of July. But an important thing is the penalties that can be imposed for breach of the code. bandwidth capping in restricting broadband services, speed, so it would reduce your ability to use the internet. Website restriction, which is bad, very bad, very, very bad. That's very bad. And disconnection. At the end of the day, the internet service provider can be required to disconnect a particular user who has been shown to be acting in breach of these regulations. So the advocates of the internet, many of them argue this is not a way to actually encourage the digital economy to grow simply by disconnecting people. And disconnection is a penalty that hangs there inside these regulations. I won't go through this line by line because we'll get to the slides. You can actually access those online yourselves. But these powers are quite extensive. And what happens is, as this says, is that the copyright owners have to lodge a copyright infringement report to the offender's internet service provider if they can produce evidence of a violation. That triggers a notice being sent. If you get 3 notices in a 12-month period, any internet user gets 3 notices in a 12-month period, it's a 3 strikes and you're out rule, because at that point your identity goes onto the copyright infringement list once you've had 3 notices, and that list goes to the copyright owner. And at that point, the identity of someone who's been breaching copyright, or alleged to be breaching copyright, becomes available to the copyright owner. Some people say, well, but how will they know? How do they know that someone's downloading stuff? Quite easily, actually, because you can put tracker software onto a particular site. The copyright owners know where the peer-to-peer providers' sites are, and they can track material that's going to and from those sites, so they understand what's happening. There are ways in which it can be disguised, and we'll come up to those in a moment. So this goes through the process. I think we can page on a little bit, Sally, about how this 3 strikes process works, and you've got the slides. You can read that in a little more detail. I won't bore you with all of that. But one of the problems is that it applies to people who are identified in these in the Act as subscribers, it calls them, and that is basically anyone who owns the particular connection. What that could mean, for example, is that parents may obviously pay for the internet connection, but if their kids use it for downloading material which they shouldn't, that internet connection could potentially be disconnected under these regulations. So, and it can also happen with small businesses. So if a business has an internet connection, as every business does these days, and 1 or 2 employees use it for downloading material in breach of copyright, the entire business could find its internet connection cut off, disconnected under these regulations. There are arguments that it might affect universities and other public institutions, because people within those institutions, 1 or 2 individuals may overstep the mark, and the result could be the entire institution could lose its internet connection. So there are some dangerous areas here that people are quite worried about. We've been through the process. I won't repeat myself. I know lawyers love to repeat themselves, so I'll try not to do that. Move on a little bit. Now these are the details of the code that I will actually skip over a little bit. Let's keep on going, Sally. Initially, it is going to apply to only these big internet service providers. These together, these 7 or 8 there, 7 ISPs, control 96.5% of the UK residential and business broadband market. There are some smaller ISPs who aren't yet covered. The idea is that go for the big guys first, test how the code works, but there is a threat that it will be applied to smaller ISPs as well. Anybody in the room use any of these as their ISP?